You see it everywhere. People who say they want something badly, but the moment it gets inconvenient, they quietly step back. People with big goals, strong words, real enthusiasm in the beginning. But somehow, when things get difficult, that enthusiasm evaporates. And you start to wonder, how can that be? How can someone talk about a goal with so much passion and still walk away from it the first time it costs them something? Well, I'll tell you what I've discovered. There's a difference. A quiet but massive difference between being interested and being committed. And that difference is where most goals quietly die. It doesn't happen with a dramatic announcement. Nobody stands up and says, "I quit." Most goals die silently. They fade in the space between "I really want this" and "I'll do whatever it takes." They disappear in the gap between enthusiasm and obligation. And if you're not careful, that gap becomes your whole story. A story full of things you were once excited about and quietly let go of. A story of "I was really into that for a while. I used to do that. I was going to. But then things got busy." That's not the story you want. It's not the story anyone wants, but it's the story most people end up living. Not because they didn't care, but because caring was never the same thing as committing. It's a painful realization to look back and see that it wasn't lack of passion that held you back. It wasn't lack of talent. It wasn't even bad timing. It was the fact that you were interested, genuinely interested, but never fully committed. And there's a real difference between those two words, even though people use them like they mean the same thing. Interest says, "I'll do it if it's convenient." Commitment says, "I'll do it no matter what." Interest says, "I'll do it when I feel like it." Commitment says, "I'll do it especially when I don't." Interest looks for reasons to make an exception. Commitment looks for a way to keep the promise anyway. And most people, if they're honest with themselves, have spent far more of their lives interested than committed. Now, I'm not saying interest doesn't matter. Of course it does. Interest is where everything starts. It's the spark, the curiosity, the reason you look twice at something in the first place. But interest is just the spark. It's not the fire. It's not the fuel that keeps burning once the excitement fades. To actually build something, you need commitment, and commitment shows up long after interest has already worn off. This conversation is not about motivation. It's not about finding your passion. It's not about waiting until you feel inspired enough to commit. It's about understanding the gap between the two and deciding right now which side of that gap you actually intend to live on. Because that gap is the difference between who you are and who you keep almost becoming. And every day you leave that gap unaddressed, the life you actually want slips a little further away. This is your chance to close that gap deliberately, honestly, permanently. To stop calling yourself dedicated when what you really are is curious. To stop mistaking enthusiasm for follow-through. Because once you commit even imperfectly, even inconsistently at first, you step out of the world of maybe and into the world of building. And that's where real change actually begins. Interest is everywhere. Everyone is interested in getting healthier. Everyone is interested in making more money. Everyone is interested in a better relationship, a stronger routine, a calmer mind. Walk into any gym in January and you'll see rooms full of interested people. Talk to anyone about their side project, their savings plan, their new habit, and you'll hear plenty of interest. And yet, despite all this interest, very few people actually change. Very few people take that spark and turn it into something that survives contact with a bad week. You can find 100 people who are interested in starting a business. You will find far fewer who are actually committed to running one through the slow, uncertain, unglamorous middle, where most businesses either survive or quietly die. The problem isn't a lack of interest. That hasn't been the problem for a long time. The problem is that interest has become a substitute for commitment. People feel like they're committed because they talk about the goal constantly, because they bought the equipment, downloaded the app, told their friends, made the plan. For a moment, They get the emotional reward that normally comes from actually following through, without ever having tested whether they'd still show up on the hard days. It's like buying running shoes and feeling like you're already a runner. You're not, but your brain gets just enough of a hit from the purchase to feel like progress happened. You see, interest without commitment is deceptive. It creates the illusion of dedication. You feel invested, but you're not actually tested yet. You're collecting enthusiasm, but enthusiasm doesn't survive a difficult Tuesday. Enthusiasm doesn't show up when you're tired. Enthusiasm doesn't keep a promise when nobody's watching. Only commitment does that. Most people don't need a new goal. They already have the right one. What they need is to find out whether they're actually committed to it, or whether they were only ever interested. And that's where they fall short, not in choosing the right thing, but in discovering, usually the hard way, that their interest quietly evaporated the moment things stopped being easy. Years ago, I met a man who had started more projects than anyone I've ever known. A restaurant idea, a fitness routine, an online course, a rental property plan, a book he was going to write. He could talk about every single one with real energy, real detail, real excitement. But when I asked him which ones he had actually finished, he went quiet. None of them. Not one. Why? Because interest gets you to the starting line. It doesn't get you through the middle. And for all his enthusiasm, he had never once been tested by the boring, difficult, unremarkable middle stretch where commitment actually matters. He never crossed from interested into committed. You don't get credit for what excited you. Life pays out based on what you actually finished, what you followed through on when the excitement was long gone. That's why someone with a smaller, less impressive goal, but real commitment will always outlast the person with a brilliant idea and no staying power. The most dangerous place to be is thinking you're serious about something. Simply because you're excited about it, you keep talking, you keep planning, you keep buying the gear and making the announcements. But you never actually get tested. You never find out if you would have shown up on the day it stopped being fun. Why? Because excitement is not commitment. Talking about it is not doing it. Buying the notebook is not writing the book. Only follow-through crosses that line. If all it took was being interested, everyone would already have the body, the business, and the life they talk about. But that's not how it works. Getting interested is the easy part. Staying committed is where the real work begins. That's where resistance shows up. That's where the excuses start creeping in. That's where you find out whether you were ever serious or just curious. So ask yourself, honestly, what have you said you're passionate about that you've actually followed through on for more than a few weeks? What goal have you talked about at every dinner party but never tested against a genuinely hard day? What have you been interested in for years without ever fully committing to it? That's the gap. That's the difference between staying someone who talks about change and becoming someone who actually lives differently. Don't confuse enthusiasm with commitment. Don't confuse talking about the goal with actually being tied to it. At some point, you've got to stop being merely interested and start being genuinely obligated to the outcome. That's the moment everything starts to change. So the question is, if people are genuinely interested in something, why don't they commit to it fully? And the answer, more often than not, isn't a lack of desire. It's fear. It's the quiet comfort of staying only halfway in. Because as long as you're only interested, you always have an exit. You can walk away and say it just wasn't for me, rather than admitting you gave it everything and it still didn't work. As long as you keep one foot out the door, you never have to face the possibility of full effort followed by failure. You see, interest feels safe. Interest keeps an exit open. You can stay only mildly invested forever and never risk the embarrassment of trying completely and falling short. That's why people stay stuck at the level of interest, not because they don't want the outcome, but because they're afraid of what full commitment might reveal about their limits. There's a kind of protection in staying merely interested. You can look busy. You can look invested. You can talk a good game. And from the outside, it even looks like dedication. But deep down, you know you've kept an escape route open the whole time. You're avoiding the one thing that actually determines the outcome. Full commitment. Perfectionism plays a role here too. People think if they can't commit in the perfect way, with the perfect plan, at the perfect time, they shouldn't commit at all. So they hover in the comfortable middle ground of interest, waiting for the ideal moment to go all in. And the irony is, the only way to discover whether you're actually capable of commitment is to commit imperfectly and find out. You'll never know if you're built for this by staying interested from a safe distance forever. Then there's the trap of keeping too many options open at once. People stay interested in 5 different directions because committing to just one feels like closing doors. So they spread themselves across a dozen half-hearted pursuits instead of fully backing one. They tell themselves this is flexibility. It's actually dilution. Every option you keep open out of fear is energy you never gave to the one thing that might have actually worked if you had committed to it completely. You were not built to stay curious forever. You weren't meant to hover at the edge of a dozen half-started pursuits, testing the water while your actual chances quietly expire. You were built to choose, to commit, to stay, and everything you actually want: growth, mastery, a finished thing you can point to. It all lives on the other side of commitment. So now the illusion has to end. Being interested is not enough. You know that. You've felt it. You've watched other people stay interested for years while nothing changed. And now you understand why people stop at interest. Because staying interested feels safer than fully committing to something that might not work out. But safety is not mastery. Safety is not achievement. Safety is not the life you actually pictured for yourself. If you want real change, you've got to stop hedging and start choosing. That's the only way the gap between interested and committed ever closes. Most people are waiting to feel fully certain before they commit. Waiting to feel more confident, more ready, more sure this is the right thing. But here's what I've found. That certainty doesn't show up first. It shows up later. It doesn't lead commitment. It follows it. You don't commit because you finally feel sure. You start feeling sure because you finally committed. You don't stay because you're certain it'll work. You build certainty by staying. The feeling everyone is waiting for is produced by the commitment itself, not the other way around. And the people who figure that out, they stop waiting to feel ready. They commit anyway, and the certainty catches up later. Commitment is what bridges that gap. Commitment is staying when you don't feel like staying, especially when you don't feel like it. Commitment doesn't ask how excited you are today. It doesn't wait until the passion returns. It doesn't negotiate. Commitment just shows up and keeps going. You know what separates the people who casually dabble from the people who actually master something? It's not talent. It's not resources. It's not even how interesting the goal is. It's commitment. Interested people show up when it's exciting. Committed people show up because it's their turn to show up. They don't let a boring week decide whether they continue. They don't let a bad mood determine whether the promise still counts. They stay no matter what. You don't need to be extraordinary to commit. You just need to decide. You need to decide that staying matters more than feeling inspired. You need to decide that finishing matters more than how it feels along the way. You need to decide that the version of yourself who actually followed through is worth more than the comfort of staying merely interested forever. Commitment doesn't require perfection either. That's another trap people fall into. They think they can't fully commit until they know exactly how it's going to go. But here's the truth. Nothing about commitment feels graceful in the beginning. It's clumsy. It's uncertain. It's often uncomfortable. But it's necessary. The only way to find out if you're actually capable of this is to commit before you know how it ends. Commitment says, I'll show up anyway. I'll show up bored. I'll show up when the excitement is completely gone. But I'll show up And if you keep showing up, you build something real. You build resilience, you build proof, you build an identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who gets interested in things and start becoming someone who finishes them. And that identity matters. When commitment becomes part of who you are, you stop needing constant motivation to keep going. You stop negotiating with yourself every single day about whether today still counts. You just continue. The way you continue brushing your teeth or showing up to something you've already decided matters. It becomes automatic, and that's the goal. Not to force commitment forever through sheer effort, but to practice it long enough that it quietly becomes part of you. Most people are trying to feel their way into commitment, but the real path runs the other direction. You commit your way into feeling sure. Show up first. Confidence comes later. Stay when it's boring. Meaning comes later. Keep going when the plan feels shaky. Clarity comes later. Everything you're waiting to feel before you commit actually lives on the other side of commitment, not before it. So start small. One promise, one habit, one thing you finish completely instead of 5 things you dabble in. Don't wait to feel fully certain. Just commit. Keep the promise small enough to actually keep. And every time you follow through, you prove something to yourself. That you're not just interested anymore, that you're building something. That you're becoming the kind of person who finishes what they start. And that's what actually changes everything. Not talent, not the size of the idea, not perfect timing. What changes everything is staying committed, quietly, repeatedly, long after the initial spark has faded. Not once in a while, consistently. That's how the gap between interested and committed finally closes. That's how enthusiasm turns into mastery. That's how goals stop quietly dying in the space between excitement and follow-through. People are always waiting for more certainty before they fully commit. Waiting for the perfect opportunity, the clearer sign, the moment when doubt finally disappears completely. And while they wait, time passes. The excitement fades a little more each week, and eventually the thing they were once so interested in becomes just another item on the list of things they used to be into. You've probably heard people say, "I'm still figuring out if this is really for me." But think about it. When does anyone ever fully figure that out without actually committing first? It doesn't happen because certainty before commitment doesn't exist. The right moment to commit is not a feeling. It's a decision. That's the only way anything meaningful actually begins. Not because every doubt disappeared first, but because someone decided to stop waiting for certainty and commit anyway. They said, "I don't have it all figured out, but I'm staying," and that decision is what makes the difference. People disguise fear of full commitment as being thoughtful. They call it exploring their options. They call it staying open-minded. But underneath it, it's often hesitation, the part of you that wants the reward of mastery without the risk of full investment, growth without the discomfort of actually being tied to something. But you and I both know it doesn't work that way. If you're not willing to commit before you're fully certain, you'll stay interested forever and committed to nothing. Everybody wants a shortcut to mastery. Everyone wants the fast path, the trick, the one insight that skips the boring middle entirely. But the real shortcut, the only one that actually works, is staying. It's not a secret. It's not complicated. It's daily commitment, repeated, especially on the days it feels pointless. That's it. You can dabble. You can drift between interests. You can start over every few months with a new spark of enthusiasm. But every restart costs you. Every time you swap commitment for a new interest, you reset the clock on the very thing that would have made the last one work, given enough time. And the person who just stays quietly, steadily, committed to one thing long after the excitement fades, they pull ahead. Not because they're more talented, not because their idea was better, just because they didn't quit when it stopped being fun. Mastery doesn't reward the most excited. It rewards the most committed. You don't need constant inspiration. You don't need to feel passionate every single day. You just need to keep showing up for the thing you already decided mattered. That's how the gap between interested and committed finally disappears. The difference between being interested and being committed is everything. It's the difference between almost and actually, between dabbling and mastering, between the life you talk about wanting and the life you're actually building. So decide today which one you're going to be. Not tomorrow, not once you feel ready, today. Even if it's uncertain, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're not sure it'll work out, decide to commit anyway. Because the moment you stop merely being interested, everything starts to change.